Welcome to the webinar on violence and bullying prevention in schools. This webinar is organized by the UNESCO Institute for Information Technologies in Education, UNESCO, the World Anti-Bullying Forum, the Global Education Monitoring Report Team, and UNESCO Chair for Global Health and Education. My name is Goof Buijs. I'm the manager from the UNESCO Chair and very happy to be the moderator of this meeting. And thank you for taking the effort to join on this very important topic. And you can use the Q&A and the chat or Q&A for asking questions. And we'll make sure that your questions will be answered by our panelists. We have an excellent panel. I'm happy to introduce the panel to you very soon. And as you can see, when everybody's coming in, we have a truly global audience and we expect quite a few more people to join. It's great that you are here. So I'm happy to introduce the speakers. Frida, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone around the world. My name is Frida Vari. I'm the Managing Director of the World Anti-Bullying Forum and also the Head of Research and Development at the Swedish anti-bullying organization Friends, where I work. Friends are the initiators of the World Anti-Bullying Forum, which is a global conference and meeting place for researchers, practitioners, and policymakers in the quest to stop bullying.
Okay, thank you very much, Frida. And Nicola Gray.
Thanks very much. I'm Nicola Gray. I am the co-chair of the UNESCO Chair Global Health and Education. I'm an academic pharmacist based at the University of Huddersfield in the UK. And my interest has been health and well-being in schools and where children and young people get information about health and well-being from all possible sources in their life.
Thank you very much, Nicola. And Manos?
Hello, everyone. I'm Manos Antoninis. I'm the director of the Global Education Monitoring Report. Of course, we care about bullying, bullying being one of the thematic indicators in the SDG 4 agenda. But most recently, our 2023 report focused on technology, and therefore, as part of our broad sweep on this topic, we covered aspects of cyberbullying, which I will comment later.
Thank you, Manos. And Yongfeng, could you please briefly introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Liu Yongfeng. I'm program specialist in the section of health and education, working on education for health and well-being, based in the UNESCO headquarters. Over.
Okay. And then last but not least, Tigran, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody who has come to this webinar and who has put efforts to make this gathering happening. I'm Tigran Yepoyan. I'm Regional HIV and Health Education Advisor for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and work with UNESCO at UNESCO Institute for Information Technologies in Education. I oversee the development and promotion of technology-based or technology-powered tools for health and well-being education for young people and support teacher capacity building for violence prevention, health education, sexuality education, and other related topics. Previously, I worked with UNICEF and international NGOs in areas of HIV, education, health, social support, youth and community development in Eastern Europe and Central Asia.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So to begin with, I would like to ask our speakers, Frida Wark, and sorry to pronounce your surname, not as the Swedish way, Frida, and Nicola Gray, to answer the following two questions. Can we agree that violence and bullying are just part of growing up? And if not, why? And the second question that you both will address is, how do violence and bullying affect children and adolescents, and why does gender matter? And our first speaker will be Nicola. So Nicola, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Hof. Okay. Thanks very much. And what I'm hoping to do is to open this discussion, and thanks very much for inviting me to do so, with a look at the big picture about violence and bullying. So, of course, the answer to the first question must be no. Violence and bullying should not be just part of growing up, but I think that the risks are very high. So what I'm hoping to do with this first slide is to put school into context. And a few years ago, I was introduced to the concept in the UK of contextual safeguarding. And I think it's useful to refer to that here when considering violence and bullying, because it does show school in its proper context. So issues of safeguarding and child protection have concentrated on things that happen to the child in the home. And it does seem to be that that transition from primary to secondary education is a time when parents are less aware of what happens to them beyond the door of the home. And you can see that next layer of the social circle is the peer group, which is really attractive and influential. So there's a tendency towards doing things that might make people fit in, which could go as far as group offending. It could be shoplifting or daring each other to do things that wouldn't happen if young people were not part of a group, and people want to be in a group. And then we get to the point in the next layer where we've got a lot of peer groups, different little groups there that are concentrated in one school environment. And in that school environment, we might see bullying and other negative behaviours happen. And we can't divorce all of this from the impact of the neighbourhood. Schools are hubs within neighbourhoods and communities. Indeed, some schools may even have rivalries between each other. And in somewhere like the UK, where you've got school uniforms, that can be very obvious to see. So school is one part of a wider system, and violence and bullying could be experienced in any part of it. So our remit today is to look at schools which have a lot of potential to be protective and to mitigate against other areas of violence and bullying. Recently, we had the pleasure in the UNESCO chair of working with our colleagues in UNESCO and UNICEF and WHO to put a session together for the Global Forum for Adolescents. And it was about promoting well-being in schools. And when we were designing the session, one of our young leaders said to us, well, one way you can think about schools and conceptualize them is as built environments, thinking about the physical spaces in schools, and then about the processes of learning that go on within schools. And actually, I thought in this context of bullying, it might be worth looking at them in that way. So if we think about the built environment of schools, you can think of hotspots in schools, perhaps. So it might be a narrow corridor. It might be a dark stairwell. It could often be changing rooms and toilets, where if something is not well supervised, it could be seen as an opportunity for bullying to take place and other forms of violence. And then the route to school, you know, what does a young person have to navigate between leaving the front door of their own home and the school gate? Do they have to cross areas in that time where they might see intimidating peers? Is that somewhere where bullying might take place or violence? And then there are places close to schools. So it might be popular food vendors nearby, or a park, or even friends' homes. You know, so it's thinking about these physical spaces where things can happen to children and young people. But then within the schools, these processes of learning, and it starts with school leadership and culture. What are the policies in schools that relate to bullying and violence? Is it seen as part of growing up by the leadership in the school, or is it more of a zero tolerance approach? So thinking about what happens in the classroom, do teachers have a bullying style of teaching? You know, do people get humiliated when they're in the classroom? And does that kind of filter out into group activities? Or can we, you know, improve that situation? Are people being desensitized to a problem that might seem to be entrenched and might seem to be very difficult to change? The processes of learning center on the curriculum. So books and literature be used to talk about experiences of violence and bullying that other youth or children might have had. And do the processes in the classroom instill learning and respect for each other, and indeed about the valuing of diversity as that might relate to disability or race, culture, gender, sexual orientation. So we need to be thinking about safe spaces, both physically and within learning processes for young people at school. So the second question is, how does bullying and violence affect physical and mental health, and why does gender matter? So the impact on well-being, well, in terms of physical health, if you are being bullied, you might actually have bodily injuries. And it could be that part of the reason for the bullying or violence comes from the fact that somebody has a condition that they need to manage at school. Perhaps they have an inhaler, or perhaps they're injecting insulin at school. And if, you know, these things are picked up on and taunted, and you know, people make fun of those things, then perhaps there's going to be poor management of these non-communicable diseases like diabetes or asthma that can have a physical impact. Then if we move to mental health, you know, the impact of bullying can be feeling lonely, could be suicidal, being isolated. And there is also research to suggest, and we have many great resources on our webpage that you can refer to after the webinar, showing things about, for example, increased substance use among young people who are bullied. And then what about the educational prospect? Because if for one reason or another you don't want to be at school, or you have to skip lessons, then your educational prospects might be damaged. You might be reluctant to attend, and your performance might be affected. And we know that there is a mutuality, a mutual benefit to health and education. Students who are healthy are ready to learn, and students who learn well and get great educational outcomes have positive outcomes later in life around their health. So it's really important that people attend. And then what about the impact of gender? Well, the type of bullying that happens can differ by gender. So male gender might be linked with physical bullying, female gender with psychological bullying. Gender has an impact on risk. All people are at risk of gender-based violence, but those who are perceived to not to conform to the norms of a binary notion of gender or sexuality, they may be at increased risk of bullying. And indeed, many types of otherness exist, and the challenge for us is to make sure that that diversity is valued. So here are some reflections for today. Really looking forward to other speakers and the discussion we're going to have. So how do we find safe space where nothing is private? How do we understand the context within schools and beyond the gates? How do we fight that desensitization and trivialization of bullying? How do we promote belonging, think about good role modeling, and make it everybody's responsibility in the school community to take this challenge on? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for your contribution. And now we'll continue with Frida.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, Nicola, for a great start to these very hard and complex questions. Can we agree that violence and bullying are just part of growing up? I think most of us who attending this webinar already have agreed on a no on that question. I just wanted to bring out one part from the comment from the Committee of the Rights of the Child regarding the Article 19 and the right of the child to freedom from all forms of violence, where it's clearly stated that no violence against children is justifiable, and also all violence against children is preventable. And I wanted to bring this up also to share some hope, because I think this is a very hopeful statement, because of course sometimes when you look around you and you listen to children and what they experience in their everyday lives, you can feel that we have a long way to go, which we do, but it is also possible to prevent the violence that occurs, and bullying is a type of violence. And I wanted to say a little bit more about the effects on bullying, what it can do to children. Like Nicola also started to say, it has severe effects on various parts of their life. And bullying is now a very well researched part of children's lives. It has grown exponentially since the 70s, the amounts of published research articles on bullying. One of the things that are mostly researched are the the effects of bullying. What does it actually do? And also what are the connections between bullying and various negative consequences. So there is so much research that you can almost say that it's a causality between bullying and anxiety, poor health, depression, suicidal thoughts, and attempts on self-harm. There's research states that more than a quarter of the depression among 18-year-olds are caused by bullying. And also the depression, it increases with the dose. The more bullying, the more depression. And suicide attempts is 4 times more common among children that are frequently exposed to bullying. And one Australian study shows that anxiety and depression due to bullying during childhood constitutes 8 and 10% of the problems in total, respectively, in that country. So we can see that it has a severe consequences on mental health, but also, of course, on education. There's a Swedish study shows that there's a 1.75 times higher risk of failing grades. You can have very low educational achievements. Bullying is the biggest risk for school absence among boys compared to all other forms of violence against children. That's also gender issues, that the effects can vary depending on who you are. So for boys, it's the most serious type of violence when it comes to the risk of dropping out of school. And it's also, in some studies have shown that it's the most common reason for dropping out of high school among young people who are neither working nor studying. And these effects of bullying is not only, I mean, like I mentioned before, it depends on also the dose of bullying, which also is a good thing to remember when it comes to prevention, that if we catch it early, if we do something in the beginning, we have a better chance of also buffering or helping these children not to gain severe consequences. And you don't need to look at the numbers on this picture. You only see that it is increasing. This is a Swedish study, but with over 3,000 children, where you see that if the more you are subjected to bullying, the more mental health problems you get. So it's very clear that if we do something early, and if we prevent or act early on, we can prevent a lot of mental health problems among children. And it's not only when they are children, it continues into adulthood. The mental health problems, there are greater risk of depression, suicide attempts, and suicide, especially among those frequently exposed. And it has more serious consequences for mental health as an adult than neglect during childhood. If you compare, if you've been subjected to neglect in the family, or if you've been bullied, you have more serious consequences for mental health. And there's a big study looking at 50-year-olds that have been bullied. They have lower income more often. They are unemployed. They have less money saved compared to their non-exposed peers. So that is just a summary on why we all can agree on the answer no, on if this is something that is just a normal part of childhood and something that we can agree that we can just brush off. We cannot do that. And what has gender to do with it? Well, it is a gendered experience. As Nicola mentioned, there can be difference in the type of bullying that girls and boys are subjected to. The verbal and physical bullying is more common among boys, and the psychological or relational bullying is more common among girls. But another thing is that boys are most often, not always, subjected by other boys, and girls are subjected by girls and boys, which means that girls are sometimes more like subjected double up. It's a double vulnerability. But what I really want to point out when it comes to the school environment is that school staff are much more likely to see the verbal and physical bullying and to act on it, and they're less likely to see the relational bullying or the psychological bullying, which is of course not. It is totally natural. If you see someone pushing or shoving or saying mean words, it's easier as an adult to see that, to be aware of that, than when it comes to the more slim forms of like psychological or relational bullying. Oh, sorry, wrong way. And it's also been shown, and that's also something that the students that we meet in our organization, that they say that adults place higher demands on girls' social ability. We expect girls to be more social. We expect them to take care of their relationships. We expect them to be to have higher better skills when it comes to their social abilities, and they're also expected to resolve more conflicts on their own. So an advice that we get from students, and something that we can, I think, school staff can be better at, is to take a close look on social interactions. And I'm a teacher myself from the beginning. It's not an easy task to do that, but you can study relationships closer and see that someone is a part of a group. It appears that someone is a part of a group, but she or he can still be left out. You are not included on equal terms. Your membership in that group is conditional. So there's can be very the power balances within these groups can also be the grounds for bullying or ostracism, to be left out. And it's also common that adults reinterpret bullying as conflicts and let the students solve the conflicts on their own. And this is more often for girls, because what I said recently about the type of the bullying that they are subjected to. So one advice would be to not leave students alone with that, but to actually give them the support and help from adults to resolve the situation that they need. Because we are, as adults, school staff as adults are, we have more experiences when it comes to social interactions, so we can help them and be closer and take a closer look to that. And that's also one of the things that need to be included in the monitoring of bullying, to talk to students, to ask them what they are really experience in their everyday life. Another aspect that I want to bring up is the gender policing. Like Nicola said, that students that are not non-conforming to gender norms or non-binary, and also all students that are not within the norms of the binary gender systems are also, of course, more subjected to bullying, but it's also a ground for bullying in general. And this is apart from a research article, that students' speech, behavior, and dress are regulated by cultural rules related to the right way to exist in the school environment. And youth's everyday gender policing practices often fail to draw adults' attentions, because these behaviors largely align with the institutional values of school. Young people's attitude about difference are partially formed in a school-based social sense that rewards conformity. So we also need to take a look at ourselves and the school climate and the school environment to come to terms with the gender policing. Because in an environment where there are very few ways to be correct, if there are very set norms and the ways you are supposed to be normal, to be correct, then the need to find someone who's more wrong than yourself arises, and that can lead to victimization of various kinds. So we can either categorize some students as different and try to get others to tolerate them, but that doesn't change the power balance. The power balance is still there. We categorize someone as different, or we can look at what characterizes them as different and work to change that attitude, to actually changing the norms instead of just tolerating those who are categorized as different. So there's just a few notes that I would like to contribute with today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frida. Just maybe one question for clarification. Can you give one or two examples of what you mean with gender policing practices?
Yes, of course. It can be anything. I mean, there are very strict rules on how to act as the if you just look at the binary system, how to act as a girl and a boy, and it can of course vary in different cultures and different parts of the world. But for example, the way you sit, if you sit with your legs crossed or if you sit with your legs open, that can be just like a statement if you're a boy or a girl. And if you deviate from that norm, maybe how you walk, how you wear your hair, if you wear jewelry, if you have nail polish, whatever, that can be policed by other students, and that can be policed by just a look. It can be a sigh, it can be an actual word, pushing someone down, it can be violence, it can be hitting someone. And I mean, it can also lead to severe violence, and in some, when it's hate crime, it's murder. It can lead to it's a stare, so to speak.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, it's clear. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And checking with Sylvia. Sylvia, were there any questions from the audience?
Yes, thank you. We have a few questions. The first question is, what laws can we implement to prevent bullying and violence? And a second question is, where to find scientific studies about differences in bullying between genders?
And there's a question for Frida and for Nicola. I guess, Nicola, maybe you could also answer. You can decide yourself who's going to answer. Frida, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can just say something about about legislation, because it's of course different in many countries, but we see more and more strict legislation about bullying behavior in school. It varies, of course. We have a debate here in Sweden because we have very strict regulation, very strict legislation, where schools have to act, even if it's just one time. We don't actually mention bullying in the legislation in the Education Act. It's called degrading treatment, and that is the reason for it is that the legislators want schools to act even when it's just occurred one time, which is good, but it had also, of course, other effects when you don't mention bullying. And just very short on research, there are so much research, it's kind of hard to just point you to one place where you can find research, but Google Scholar is a great way, and just typing bullying and other words that you're interested in.
Okay, thank you. And Nicola, you might want to add.
I just thought I'd add something about the question about legislation, and really about, because I guess the intent behind the question is where do the deterrents come from? And I think that the policies within schools, that will nestle under the legislation, it's really that tone coming from the leadership, coming from teachers, that this is not acceptable and that people will be acting upon it. But I think for those to be effective, we also need support for the teachers, because it strikes me that exactly the same things could be going on in the staff room as are going on in the classroom. And, it's actually, school is a mini city, it's a mini community. My colleague Didier Jourdan would say, sort of like there are millions and billions of people who are in schools every day, adults and children. And these are processes that happen between people. And so we've got to be thinking about the whole environment at school and what's going on with the teachers as much as what's going on with the students. And then the better support will come.
Great. Thank you very much, Nicola. And thank you both, Frida and Nicola, for your presentation, your contribution to this webinar. And it's actually Nicola, it's a nice lead into our next speaker, which will be Yongfeng from the UNESCO headquarters. On November the 2nd, sorry, Yongfeng, we marked the UNESCO International Day Against Violence and Bullying at School, including cyberbullying. The theme of this year has been mental health. Why? And how do violence and bullying affect learners' mental health?
So the first question about the theme of the International Day Against Violence and Bullying at School, including cyberbullying. So this International Day was declared by UNESCO in 2019 to recognize that school-related violence in all its forms is an infringement of children and adolescents' rights to education and their health and well-being. So this day is to call on learners, parents, members of education communities, education authorities, and a range of sectors and partners, including the tech industry, to take part in preventing all forms of violence and fostering safe learning environments. So this year, indeed, we highlight the strong links between school health and mental health, school violence and mental health under the theme, No Place for Fear, Ending School Violence for Better Mental Health and Learning. So I would like to answer this question, why this focus on mental health with the following aspects. First point to make is just because of the challenges that children and young people face in their mental health and well-being, which are strongly linked to school violence and bullying, including cyberbullying. So let's first be reminded of a few data points about mental health of adolescents published by the World Health Organization in November 2021. So this data is quite recent. So you can see from the screen that globally 1 in 7 adolescents experiences a mental disorder, accounting for 13% of the global burden of disease in this age group.
Sorry, Yongfeng, we cannot see it on the screen. Now we can. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. And depression, anxiety, and behavioral disorders are among the leading causes of illness and disability among adolescents. Suicide is the 4th leading causes of death among 15 to 29-year-olds. And the consequences of failing to address adolescent mental health conditions extend to adulthood, impairing both physical and mental health and limiting opportunities to lead fulfilling lives as adults. So, and the second point to make is that mental health and well-being is important for education and learning. It's already mentioned by our previous speakers. So we know that healthy learners learn better. Good mental health and well-being are associated with better school engagement, increased attendance, and better academic performance, strengthening learners' social and emotional skills such as problem solving and emotional regulation is associated with better coping and resilience, reduced symptoms of depression and anxiety, and less substance use. And conversely, poor mental health and well-being and the experience of mental health conditions contribute to underachievement, absenteeism, disruptive classroom behavior, and school dropout. And the global learning crisis is due not only to inadequate investment in teachers and school infrastructure, but also to lack of attention to the well-being of children and adolescents, which has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And investing in mental health and well-being will ensure that learners thrive at school, with repercussions into adulthood, including positive impact on next generation. And the next point to make is that violence, especially sexual violence and bullying, are recognized risk to mental health. So this has been very well said by Frida and Nicholas, and I'm not going to repeat all this data presented, especially by Frida just a while ago. And just like to highlight that the impact of violence on mental health is not only affect the victims. Perpetrating violence is also associated with poor mental health. with evidence that children with emotional and behavioral disorders can engage in aggressive behaviors. And also teachers may also experience or witness violence and may report stress and fear at work and in a violent environment. And preventing and responding to school violence, including bullying, both offline and online and gender-based violence, can have a direct impact on the protection of learners, their mental health, and in turn their learning. And finally, we feature this theme on mental health and school violence. Violence is also because we believe that schools are well placed for supporting mental health and well-being. We know that most children and adolescents spend much of their time at school. The school years are a period of rapid development during which children and adolescents experience profound physical, social, and psychological changes, and during which the maturing brain is highly susceptible to environmental influences. And we know that schools are well placed to create conditions that promote learners' mental health and well-being and prevent mental health problems, increase mental health literacy, develop social emotional skills, and identify risks and early signs and symptoms of emotional distress and other mental health conditions. So as required, schools can increase access to mental health and psychological support services for learners, their families, and teachers. And schools are also key environments for learners to develop a sense of community, of being valued, and belonging within a safe, inclusive environment. So schools are also places to which learners, families, and communities can turn for support. So this, I hope, answered the question why we highlight the linkages between mental health and school violence and bullying as a theme for the International Day Against Violence and Bullying, including cyberbullying this year.
Thank you, Yongfeng, for your introduction and answer to the question. One of the comments in the chat is that from a colleague from WHO headquarters, that advocacy is very important, not only at policy makers level, but to raise the awareness of the parents and the community as well. So I'm sure you agree with that. That's what you're doing, right?
Yeah, I can't agree more. Yeah.
That's why you created this day, International Day, right?
Yeah.
Are there any other comments or questions, Sylvia, from participants on this?
There was a question but it was already before Yongfeng's presentation. But and the question is: students also get comments from teachers, like also Frida said, that they are not eligible to learn, and how can you influence this of the teachers towards the children?
Yongfeng, would that be a question for you or more for Frida from her? What do you think?
So it's a question about how to influence teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe Fred can also provide her insights. Teachers are definitely play a key role in the prevention and addressing violence and bullying. And we have UNESCO published a technical brief just providing recommendations for that teachers need training and support to respond to the needs of learners in this area. And even we have studies found that globally, about 1/4 of teachers may not recognize bullying as violence according to internationally accepted definition. I mean, so in short, I just mentioned they do need training and institutional support also. And I could talk more about that maybe in the second part of my interventions.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, maybe you could continue. Which is it possible to actually end violence and bullying in schools, and how can we make it more effective?
Yeah, so I would say completely eradicating school violence and bullying is a very difficult challenge because these behaviors are influenced by a range of complex factors, as mentioned by Nicola and Frida, that include individual, social, and cultural influences. However, we must work towards ending violence and bullying in schools. So the protection of children from all forms of violence is a fundamental right enshrined in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, as Frida has just quoted, that no violence against children is justifiable. All violence against children is preventable. And ending all forms of violence against children is also a specific target in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Sustainable Development Goal number 16.2. And there is evidence that it's possible to significantly reduce the incidence of violence and bullying in schools and to mitigate their impact on learners. So of the countries and territories with trend data available up to 2017, collected through the international school-based surveys, basically the two major surveys, one is the health behavior in school-aged children study in Europe and North America, and the global school-based student health survey in the other regions, that around half of the countries with trend data had seen a significant decrease in the prevalence of bullying, physical fights, and physical attacks, as shown by these bar charts. And also another example is that in Europe, comparable data on the prevalence of homophobic bullying are available from the Agency for Fundamental Rights, FRA, for 2012 and 2019. Overall, we've seen the average prevalence across countries of LGBT participants experiencing negative comments or conduct at school due to sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression decreased. Specifically, the mean percentage of victims across countries was decreased from 68% in 2012 to 56% in 2009. So while zero violence and bullying in school is a challenging goal, there are effective strategies that can significantly reduce the incidence. And these effective strategies are widely referred to as a whole school approach, or some other terms listed here. To engage stakeholders at the school level, in the local community, and in the government education authorities, work together to undertake a range of different activities aimed at making school safer, more child-friendly, and gender-sensitive, and that foster a positive, supportive, and enabling learning environment for students and educators.
Sylvia has a question. Please, Sylvia.
No, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Zhongfeng, go ahead.
Okay, so the essential components of such a holistic approach can be shown with this line component diagram here. we call it whole education approach, which was specifically developed for preventing and addressing bullying by a scientific committee for the International Conference on School Bullying, co-convened by UNESCO and the French Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport in 2020. But it's also applicable to other forms of school violence and provides a useful framework for understanding the multi-component approach to preventing and responding to school violence. So according to this approach, that strong leadership at all levels is crucial to combat violence and bullying. And teachers need training and support to create student-centered, caring classrooms and school environment. And the third component is about school curriculum, teaching methods, and teacher-student relationships that should promote the caring and anti-violence school atmosphere. And the next component, talking about schools, must ensure a psychologically and physically safe environment. And the fifth component is about establishment of clear reporting mechanisms, confidentiality, and integrated support services within schools and the wider community to help to support students affected by violence and bullying. And also, it's necessary to engage all stakeholders, including parents, and empower all students to participate in the prevention effort, including bystanders and those from minority groups, using peer-led programs alongside adult-led interventions. And it's also important to foster collaboration between the education sector, government, NGOs, academia, and digital platforms to pool resources and expertise in tackling violence and bullying. And finally, regularly monitor bullying and violence, and also assess the effectiveness of prevention measures and involve students and staff in the evaluation process, focusing on the overall school climate. So these are the 9 components integrated together into a holistic approach towards our vision to end school violence and bullying. And these 9 components are not a menu or a shopping list from which only some aspects can be selected or to reduce violence and bullying. This should be considered as an integrated elements of the holistic approach. Each of the 9 components is important and necessary, but not sufficient alone. So, and also one-off measures are not effective or sustainable. It's also important not only to help students involved in bullying, but also to make the entire education system better equipped to reduce violence, bullying, and cyberbullying among learners. National or subnational school authorities should design programs that can be effectively implemented in all schools across the networks of relationships attached to schools. And education authorities should support schools with guidance and resources. And also the guidance and resources will also needs to be in place to equip teachers, as just mentioned. So I would just I would also, just in addition to it's shown here, I would also like to emphasize that perception of violence and bullying can be different across different contexts and cultures. So therefore, all interventions need to be culturally sensitive and tailored to the specific needs of the school and its community. So with such sustained commitment and effort to address the complete ecosystem of school violence and bullying, we can indeed establish a secure and nurturing school environment devoid of any form of violence and bullying. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yongfeng, and also for making this visual of this perspective of a whole school approach, which sounds like music in my ears, to address this very systematic topic in a more holistic way is certainly very relevant. And actually, you answered one of the questions that was in the chat about the cultural impact, and that you have to adapt this system to all your national and local cultures and approaches. So thank you. And Sylvia, were there any other questions or comments from our participants?
Because wars during wars, children they cannot go to school, and how can we? Is there any way that we can influence this?
Yeah, it's a big question. I mean, everything we do, including our efforts to prevent and address violence in schools, contributes to protecting the rights of children to education. And I would say the whole education system in the context of war and the conflicts everything we are going to really to ensure to protect the rights of children to education. So I don't have a short answer to that, but I think just relevant to the topic of this webinar, I think the whole education approach I just mentioned, as recommended by a scientific committee, provides some insights that all stakeholders in the education community and their partners should work together to address all these every parts of the whole ecosystem, including the context associated with war and conflicts, to protect children from all forms of violence.
Okay, thank you very much, Yongfeng. Thank you for answering this question, this very relevant question. And now I would like to continue and give the floor to Manos Antoninis, who is working as a colleague from you at the same UNESCO headquarters in Paris. And Manos, how can education systems protect learners from the adverse consequences of technology use, specifically online violence, including cyberbullying and mental health issues? And how can school violence be measured? So, Manos, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just to explain perhaps also to the audience, that's the purpose I'm here with you today to mark this day and to contribute to this webinar, is the fact that the Global Education Monitoring Report, which, as you said, is hosted and published by UNESCO, had its latest edition launched in July on the topic of technology in education. So inevitably, among the many, many dimensions of technology in education and its application, we also looked at the on the issue of cyberbullying, which has, of course, which is synonymous with technology. Let me share a little bit also my screen to take you through a few slides just to remember the points I'm going to raise. So it is really important to recognize the strong links between school violence, mental health, and also learning outcomes, which I think some of the other speakers have raised so much, given that they are increasingly worrying and unmistakable. Schools are meant to be safe and supportive environments for children, but numbers paints a very different picture. 1 in 3 learners is bullied at school every month globally, and you have to remember, as you mentioned before, that bullying is indeed one of the indicators that has been included in the SDG 4 monitoring framework under the target 4.A, which is a target that's meant to advocate for conducive and appropriate learning environments. And almost 1 in 3 has been physically attacked at least once in a year. Such incidents can have really severe and long-lasting impacts on learners' safety, physical and mental health, and their education outcomes. And poor mental health and well-being contributes to underachievement, absenteeism, disruptive behavior in the classroom, suspensions and expulsions, and ultimately school dropout. The effects on mental health, though, were exacerbated during COVID-19 and the shutdowns that followed. Children who are bullied are twice as likely to feel lonely, to be unable to sleep, and to have contemplated suicide, as UNESCO has shown. And the child aged between 10 and 19 takes their own life on average every 11 minutes at present, according to UNICEF. Now, the 2023 Global Education Monitoring Report on education and technology showed that the growing use of digital devices in and out of schools is exacerbating these trends. The global goal has multiple different targets. Now, cyberbullying was perhaps started being envisaged at the time when SDG 4 and its monitoring framework was being conceived almost 10 years ago. But cyberbullying now, in its various forms, such as the deliberate publication of photos or videos of individuals without their consent, exclusion from digital groups, verbal violence, insults and threats, pose quite a range of troubling behaviors that are quite difficult to capture in different statistics. One of the ways, I mean, the main way really we monitor these trends is through school surveys. Two types of surveys that are actually intentionally focused on learning achievement, but collect background information. One of those, the Trends in International Mathematics and Science study, known as TIMSS, asked the last time it was administered in 2019, children in grade 4 and grade 8 about their experiences with different forms of bullying, including online bullying, which was captured in ways such as asking children to report whether they had received nasty or hurtful messages, nasty or hurtful things, or embarrassing photos online. And in nearly all countries, 1 in 10 of grade 4 students had experienced cyberbullying in the past year. The 2023 GEM report found that the share of students who have experienced cyberbullying is even higher among grade 8 students, affecting over 20% of students in 26 out of the 32 countries with available data. On top of those, we also have surveys organized by the World Health Organization, both globally and in particular regions that collect similar information. Shining a light on this issue at the school level can help, as can reporting mechanism, as this slide reminds us. Now, cyberbullying takes place exactly also where bullying occurs. It is just another different form of bullying, and as this graph shows, cyberbullying tends to be higher in countries where other forms of bullying are common. In Latvia and in South Africa, where 30 and 50% respectively of students experience cyberbullying, some of the highest rates observed globally, around 90% of students had experienced some other type of bullying. You can find these statistics in the latest 2023 Global Education Monitoring Report in the statistical tables. Now, how can we actually protect our children and their learning? Because of its impact on learning, school violence is not only a rights issue, although of course it is primarily a rights issue, but it also has other significant costs for education systems if left unaddressed. According to UNESCO, children who are frequently bullied are nearly 3 times more likely to feel like an outsider at school and more than twice as likely to miss school. They also have worse educational outcomes, scoring lower in mathematics and reading. The more often they're bullied, the worse these outcomes are. And one way to protect children from this growing phenomenon, as I think some people asked in the chat earlier, is to bring legislation on this issue. Analyzing globally all more than 200 education systems in our country profiles on the peer website, we found that only 16% of countries currently have adopted legislation to prevent and act on cyberbullying with a focus on education. Of those, almost 40% did so since the COVID-19 pandemic, so very, very recently. One complication often found when anything legal comes into play is how it ends up being defined. Most countries do not explicitly define cyberbullying and online abuse as a distinct offense, for example, so it is really found often under other laws. For instance, in Indonesia, the 2022 Personal Data Protection Act is the first comprehensive data protection law in Indonesia, which calls upon public or private entities that handle personal data to ensure data protection with sanctions applied for mishandling. And protection against cyberbullying is indirectly provided under this act. Another law, and its updates, the Electronic Information and Transaction Law in the same country, considers cyberbullying as a form of harassment. Outside of laws, ministries can also draw on policies, strategies, and plans to demonstrate their leadership. Our country profiles on the peer website found that about 40% of countries have such guidance in place. Europe and North America is the region where, with the highest share of countries, 61%, that have such a policy. Many countries take the approach of focusing on awareness raising, reporting mechanisms, and digital risk interventions, usually at the school level. These seem to be effective. A systematic review and meta-analysis of interventions in selected, mostly high-income countries, estimated that the average program has a 73% chance of reducing cyberbullying victimization, and maybe that's also linked to the trends that Yongfeng reported earlier. Now, another range of policies and laws relates to the use of mobile phones in schools, for which actually the last edition of the Global Education Monitoring Report was particularly noted for, especially since we reported the statistics that you see on this chart, either through their laws or through their policies. On average, up to 1 in 4 countries appear to be banning mobile phones in schools. And after this information was published, there was a flurry of activity that highlighted more countries interested to take a step in that direction, seemingly having to touch their own nerve, with many education systems wondering what to do with this problem, which not only has significant implications on distraction, with negative impact on learning outcomes and problems of discipline in the classroom, but also, of course, has this cyberbullying dimension. Morocco has gone a step further, also banning any photos or film being taken in school and of teachers in a bid to prevent online images being used in a malevolent manner. To come to conclusions, just to remind, of course, ourselves that outside building walls, essentially, around schools with policies and legislation, another approach, which I think some of the speakers have already alluded to, is trying to equip children and teachers with the ability to protect themselves. Here again, our peer country profiles show that almost half of countries have developed some digital skill definition, not always broad enough. Often countries tend to think of digital skills as something technical, as something operational, being able to handle some devices, but actually digital skill definitions that are broad, that are citizenship oriented, that are gradually capturing education systems' imaginations are the way forward. European countries, for instance, have used the DigComp framework as a foundation for developing strategies, programs, and tools within which skills to protect health and well-being, including protecting oneself and others from possible dangers in digital environments, are featuring very strongly. While digital technology offers some really excellent opportunities for teaching and learning, they also come with increased exposure to key risks of cybersecurity, privacy violation through data misuse, mental and physical health implications through lengthy screen time, and of course cyberbullying that we're discussing today, and harmful contents with potential long-term impacts on addictive behaviors, violence, and sexual exploitation. So empowering students to stay safe, to be responsible online, and to make smart choices are therefore important policy priorities we should take very seriously as technology becomes ever more present in our everyday lives. And the GEM report argues that we should keep learners and teachers' best interests at the center of a framework that is based on human rights. Closing, I just want to thank you and remind you that the GEM report has been focusing on this, and you see from the two policy papers on the bottom, on the left-hand side, that our interest has been long-standing. Back in 2017, 2018, we focused on the measurement of school violence through different tools. In 2020, we had a paper that focused on bullying and cyberbullying in the particular case of students targeted through their sexual orientation and gender identity. And of course, as I mentioned most recently, in our latest global edition of the report. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Manos, for your very interesting and topical talk, and very interesting to hear that the publication of your report led to some responses from governments and countries on dealing with using mobile phones in schools. And I'm sure everyone with kids or grandkids in school knows about this issue. There's a question actually from Tigran. Maybe you would like to answer that, Manos. The dilemma that banning mobile phone on photo video taking may deprive students from documenting violence and bullying to report, and thus it may have very negative effects. What do you think, how to make the right balance?
That's, of course, a question that affects not only education, but several instances of everyday life. We've seen, for instance, in France, where we're based, debates about cameras and who should be carrying cameras. Is the police? Is the protesters? There are so many such dilemmas. And I should make also clear that the report never advocated for a ban. All it did was to bring to the global attention the fact that so many countries, many more than we actually thought, have taken such steps in their different ways. Of course, bans per se are difficult. They depend on country context. They depend on traditions and culture. There are countries where laws carry extreme significance and they're followed. There are countries where things have to be negotiated and decided not centrally, but at the school and the community level. Again, it's not something, the presence of a phone is different in a rich country and a poor country. Poor countries, of course, the presence of a mobile phone, potentially, at least while the novelty still stands, can offer important resources that otherwise are not available. But even in a rich country, where we definitely know for sure that that's also evidence that the report showed impact on learning outcomes is negative, therefore something has to be done. We also know that a blanket approach is not always helpful because there are different groups of students with different needs. So for instance, learners with disabilities have their own needs, and having a phone for them is particularly important. But to the very, very, very specific question of Tigran, I think I would put it in this context that ultimately it's an issue that is present, is there, needs to be dealt with, needs to be addressed, and it needs to fit the particular context of a country. But it's not something anymore that we can hide at the country.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much for answering the question. And I would like now to give the floor to Frida again to ask you what decision makers, educators, and learners can do to prevent or reduce violence and bullying. And maybe you have an example of a successful anti-bullying program. Please, Frida.
And thank you for that, those insights on cyberbullying as well, which is of course very integrated in the school's life. Kids themselves don't make a difference between in real life bullying and cyberbullying. For them, it's part of their world. So it's very important that we address that issue as well. Well, I'm going to say something about programs. There are many, many anti-bullying programs around the world. There are some very big ones that have implemented in many countries. There are well documented effects of them, and they have small yet well documented effects in the ordering of reducing bullying between 15 to 20%. And when it comes to a big population, I mean, that's many children. So I don't want to say that anti-bullying programs are, that the effect sizes are too small, but they are, there is room for improvement. But looking at a country, if you implement a program and you get the bullying rates to go down by 15 and 20%, that can mean hundreds and thousands of children. So I mean, it is a good way to work, but it can't be the only way. I think that can be my take-home message. Please use an anti-bullying program if you think that it's suitable in your local context, in your municipality, in your school, in your country, but don't rest on that and feel that, okay, we've checked out the bullying prevention issue, so it's the only thing that you're doing, because in most cases you need to do more than just implement a program. And these effects can also be very good and higher in certain local contexts and certain schools, and be lower effects in others. So that's also something that you need to consider, that this is just an average effect. It can be explained by the national local conditions of schools, but also how well you implement the program, how well invested the school is in implementing it. But there are, of course, several things that you can do, but I think that Yang Feng also went through a lot of that when talking about the whole education approach, which is a very well underbuilt from the scientific committee who developed that framework of the whole education approach. So I think that is a very good way, also almost a checklist you can see. Is this something that we have in our context? Is it something we can take steps towards implementing or making it happen? The different 9 components of the whole education approach. But I would like to say something about the report that the WHO came out with in 2022 that was actually on what works to prevent online violence against children. But I'm bringing it up because it also showed that preventative education programs for children have been shown to increase safety and health in general, as well as reduce both bullying in school and online. So it works both for violence and bullying in school, but also works on cyberbullying. And the evidence shows, very robust evidence, that the most successful educational programs are based on strengthening the skills of children and young people. And there are some core components that these successful programs have in them. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So if we from an early age strengthen the skills of children, we will help them, we will train them, we will equip them with skills that they can use both offline and online, on the way to school, in those dark corners in the school, every part of their everyday life that they spend time in. And problem-solving skills are one of those, to work with assertiveness and self-efficacy and resistance to peer pressures, to enhance empathy and to train empathy. It is shown that children are born with empathy. Before, we thought that it was something that you learned at a certain age, but there are now evidence that you're born with empathy, but you need to train empathy, you need to practice empathy, you need to be around other people to be able to enhance your empathy, and to train perspective taking, to look at self-regulation and emotion management and impulse control is very important as well, to to train children in conflict resolution and de-escalation, and also help seeking to look to get kids to actually talk to us adults when something is happening, to seek help for their problems. Bystander or defender mobilization is very important. There's tons of research on the bystander aspect of bullying. Most bullying occurs when other students are present, and if someone says something, most bullying situation stops if someone says something or do something. And it doesn't have to be to step in a fight. It can be to just there can be much smaller things, or telling a trusted adult. Social norm intrusion, and also sex education and substance abuse educations are also part of these core components that have shown to show results both for online and offline bullying and violence. So programs are great, but I also want to share a little work that is been done right now. This is a picture from the World Anti-Bullying Forum 2 weeks ago in the Raleigh in the United States, in North Carolina, where Professor Kristina Salmivalli did a keynote presentation. And Professor Salmivalli is the developer of the Kiva program, very successful anti-bullying program. But she is also now interested in looking at what doesn't work. As you can see in her presentation, she says, we want to provide good news, we want empowerment and hope, and we want our programs to work. Thus, we report what works on average. But investigating average effects of prevention and intervention programs, it doesn't move the field forward. So right now, she's engaged in a huge research project where they're looking at what doesn't work in bullying prevention and which cases of bullying keeps on happening. Even though there's a successful prevention program in place in school, there are still some students that are still being bullied. Why? How do we solve that? So it's an ongoing research project, but I think it's very important also to learn from failure and not only from success. And that is something that Yongfeng also mentioned when it comes to the whole education approach, that it's important for every school, for every teacher, for every setting, also to look at what interventions have we put in place, what prevention strategies do we have, how did it work, and if it's not working, what can we do differently, to also to look at that in the local context, to learn from that and to talk to the students and see how they experience it. And I also wanted to show this picture because when we talk about bullying, it comes down to also what is bullying. To be able to decide what we should do about it, we need to also talk about why is it occurring, why is it happening. It doesn't occur in a vacuum. It doesn't occur out of nowhere. And this is a picture to show the analogy of the old story or the old poem about 6 blind men around an elephant. In that story, it's men around an elephant who's in the dark trying to find out what they are touching. And someone is touching the tail and think it's a snake, and someone is touching the leg and think it's a tree, and someone's touching other parts of the elephant and interpret it as different things, but it isn't until they start talking to each other in the dark and explain what they are feeling and seeing and how they are experiencing it that they actually can see that it is an elephant. And it's the same thing with bullying. It's such a complex phenomenon. So the different views or the different perspectives of bullying or in why it occurs, if it's about relationships in the group, or if it's the structural power relations in society, or if it's about individuals, we need to start talk to each other and to see the whole picture in order to see the complex perspectives of the bullying as a problem. And in the beginning, we heard Nicola talk about that school is a part of the society, different layers in society. And I want to finish by saying something also about risk and protective factors, because if we have protective factors in place and we have fewer risk factors, we can increase the possibilities for a safe and inclusive environment without bullying. And of course, risk factors are associated with a high prevalence of bullying, while protective factors buffer or protect against bullying and are associated with low prevalence of bullying. And as Nicola talked about, when it comes to the school, that school is a part of connected to different parts of society. It's the same thing when you look at bullying as a problem. And I saw before that there was a question in the chat about the theoretical frameworks of bullying prevention research. And there are many different, but one of the most used one and one of the most common ways to look at bullying is through the theory of the social ecological framework, where you look at bullying in different systems of society. This is from Bronfenbrenner in 1979, who came up with the social ecological model, but it has been adapted and used by, for example, Dorothy S. Blanche and others after to look at bullying. So basically, you can look at bullying from the macro system when it comes to cultural ideas and customs and socioeconomical status and so on. The exosystem, which is formal and informal social structures that can influence the individual, and the mesosystem, for example, where school climate, we can find school climate and relationships between students and teachers, but also between peer-to-peer relationships. In the microsystem, where you have like direct relationships between different individuals. And there are also risk and protective factors in each of these parts of the system, and they influence each other and get influenced by each other as well. So it is a complex way of looking at it, but if I should also only leave you with one of these messages to take home, is to look at the different parts of this system, look at what kind of protective factors we can implement on each level, and also if we can see what kind of risk factors we have on each level. If you do that, you have come a long way, more than most people do when it comes to bullying prevention. And if you should only start by focusing on one thing, it comes down to relationships. And I've been around the bullying prevention community, the international community, for 15 years now. And sometimes I ask both students, and I ask researchers, and I ask practitioners, if you can only do one thing. If I ask the principal that, if you can only do one thing in your school when it comes to bullying prevention, or ask the most renowned bullying prevention researchers, what's the one advice you would give to a school? They always say something about the relationships. Positive relationships between students and between students and teachers have been shown to contribute to not only success in schoolwork and provide that sense of belonging, it also is like one of the strongest protective factors against mental health problems and of course bullying. So work on the relationships, get to know every kid, make them feel seen and important, and have trusted but strong relationships between teachers and students. Then we will have come a long way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frida, and also for your very inspiring end of your presentation, saying it all comes down to relationships. And I think that's something that every school can pick up right now from this start. For time, I would like now to invite Tigran Yepoyan to speak, and I would like to ask you to give some examples of these kind of programs in the part of the world that you are working. So Tigran, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm actually thinking about kind of skipping the presentation that I have prepared and rather demonstrating you a short video just very recently produced by UNESCO in Delhi. With its emotional impact, it may be an excellent conclusion for our meeting today. But as I already put on my slide, I will just show it very, very quickly.
Please.
The levels of bullying and violence in schools in Europe and Eastern Europe, actually, and Central Asia is quite high. If we look at the top 10 or 15 countries in the famous WHO-supported health behavior in school-age children survey, which is conducted every 2 years across 45 countries and regions in Europe and Canada, we see countries from Eastern Europe in the top 10 or 15. And if we look, and this is about those who suffer from bullying, this is about who initiate bullying. And if we looked at the data, very fresh data from national surveys in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, we have a quite high level of bullying also. About 20-30% of students report that they face it in school quite regularly. Many years ago, when UNESCO first started to work on its international guidance on gender-based violence prevention in school, this work was commissioned by UNESCO together with UN Women and other partners. We also started to collect data from the regional countries to see what is the situation. And here on the screen, you see some examples of this research from Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Moldova. We have put together some guide them navigate kind of whole school response to the bullying, prevention measures. Of course, we understand that we'll never be able to fully stop any kind of violence and bullying and cyberbullying happening in the school, but we can significantly decrease the rates and kind of mitigate the adverse effect of that. And this kind of resources have been very much welcomed by the countries. And for example, in Moldova, this resource was developed by the time when the government prioritized it as a priority number one. And every school in Moldova received this guidance, and all the teachers, and not all the teachers, but teachers from all the schools in the countries have been trained how to use it. Another example is about teacher training. Just providing, emailing, or making available on a website different tools is not enough. We need to bring together educators, demonstrate them these resources, explain what they are about and how to use them. And what is even more important, to motivate them to look at the issue, to recognize the issue, not to hide it behind the carpet. And so far, we have succeeded to reach over 3,000 teachers in the region. We have also produced some educational and I would say edutainment materials for them to use in the classroom, like video lessons or short animated videos addressing violence, bullying, and cyberbullying. And what we are particularly proud is the YouTube series about harsh bullying, which a female HIV-positive student faced in a school, but has managed to overcome it thanks to her resilience, support from friends, from families, from the school nurse, and she has been elected the school president. And this is a very strong kind of signal to students, to teachers, and the series scored over 2 million views. It looks like to be popular among people in Kyrgyzstan and not only. Not only us, but many other partners, UNICEF, national governments, put together resources to address violence and bullying in the region. For example, in Belarus, there is an excellent online training course for learners, how to resist and overcome and behave in a case of bullying. Belarus, very emotional video tutorial featuring a story of a newcomer in a school who is harshly bullied. Or an example of a web page on violence and bullying for parents, teachers, and educators themselves, which is available at the website of every school in Moscow, for example. Hotlines, counseling services, etc., etc. Many things are there, but we see that it is not enough. We see that it is extremely difficult to address this issue when people get kind of conflicting messages. On the one hand, we say, well, violence and bullying is not acceptable in the school, and at the same time in the media, at the level of politicians, we see how forceful decisions, how forceful solutions are promoted, how the level of tolerance and acceptance of diversity is diminishing, how global citizenship is being kind of replaced by very narrow understanding of values and appreciation of people of different backgrounds, etc. And therefore, I believe that we really need influencers, decision makers, and media to cultivate empathy, inclusiveness, openness, and solidarity to overcome these harmful norms and stereotypes that support power imbalance and gender inequality. And this is very sadly that we see that over the past few years, gender equality has been attacked in many, many contexts at the UN level, in UNESCO, in other UN agencies, and women and girls have to pay the toll for some very, very harmful norms and stereotypes, which eventually lead to bullying, cyberbullying, gender-based bullying, homophobia in and around in school. And of course, more empowerment to teachers, learners, and parents. Well, that's probably all. If time is gone, then you can check this really very impactful video, Break the Silence, very recently released by UNESCO Delhi office, telling a story of a boy and a girl studying in India and facing violence and facing bullying, and how masterfully the teacher addresses the classroom to reshape the relationships. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Tigran. Thank you, Frida. Thank you, Manos. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Sylvia, for all your technical assistance and support. And we hereby close the webinar. The recording and all the information will be on our dedicated webpage. And we look forward to see you another time soon.